Aaron, great to have you on the show from Nashville. I'm looking forward to all you got to say because I looked over your materials and I think we're going to touch some people where they haven't been touched or they need to be stirred a little bit more. So I'm
Hey,
looking
David.
forward to what you
Yeah,
have to say.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on Manage to Win. I've been looking forward to this, and so I'm excited to share with your audience today.
Yeah, what's your background? Let people know. I mean, you didn't come out of nowhere. You got decades of experience here.
Well, yeah, this is our 42nd year being an entrepreneur. We've owned 14 businesses over the course of 4 decades now. I came from a very humble beginning. That's a nice way of saying we were broker and a convict. And so I started my first business when I was 18 years old, started working when I was 13. Sold it when I was 27 to a Fortune 500, and that kind of set me on a trajectory to be able to have a number of businesses. And so I won't bore you with all the details, but been an entrepreneur now since I was 18. And I told somebody the other day, I've never had a paycheck, since I was 18 years old. And here I am 60. And so we've had a great time being an entrepreneur in the businesses. But today we lead an organization called View from the Top. And people say, what is that? And why did you name it View from the Top? I said, because nobody wants a view from the bottom, right? We always want a view from the top. And I help people discern what a view from the top is for them. So we have 19 mastermind groups. We're in 9 different countries today, and we're having the time of our life helping people live a successful and significant life.
Super. Well, you use the pronoun we a lot, Aaron. Talk to me about who's we.
Yeah, well, we have a team. We have a great team. No, we don't do anything in isolation, and we have to have great people around us. I could say me, and that would sound very egotistical and very prideful, but I really surround myself with the right people. And so we have a small team. There's 10 of us, and we absolutely are having the time of our life today putting together these mastermind groups. And I do coaching, and I travel and speak, written a couple of books, about to write 2 more. And it takes a team to do that. I can't do it all on my own.
So what led you to do this? And I'm curious, I've heard the term mastermind being used
Sure.
before. What makes what you're doing unique?
Yeah, well, there's 2 questions you asked. What led me to do this and what makes it unique? So we'll tackle the first one first. I didn't want to do this at all, just to be totally honest with you. So I retired when I was 50 for the 3rd time. My wife said I've retired more than the law allows, but I did retire at 50. And in the mastermind group I was in, some of you may or may not know some of the members in it. It was Dave Ramsey's group. Dave and I have been friends for almost 30 years, and I was his second sponsor on his radio show when he started almost 30 years ago, and I sponsored his show for 21 consecutive years, and we became very good friends. And one day, 2 decades ago, he asked me to be in his mastermind group. And I said, I don't even know what a mastermind group is. And he said, just come to my office. I'll introduce you to the guys that we've invited. I think you'll enjoy it. And to be honest, David, I didn't want to do it because I knew Dave was a hard charger. He was going to uncover stuff that I didn't want uncovered. He was going to realize that I didn't have the answer to every question. And he was going to realize what knucklehead I really was. And so I didn't want to go, but I went anyway. And so sat in the corner for 3 or 4 months and started really listening intently to what these businessmen were sharing. There were 10 guys in the group, and Dan Miller was one of the guys. Jeff Mosley was another one. Ken Abraham was in the group, and Dave Ramsey and Ken Doyle, some other really, really cool people here in Nashville. And they started sharing these amazing things. And I went, well, they're a knucklehead just like I am. I mean, they don't have all the answers either. I thought they did. And we started sharing and ideas, and they started telling me about family problems they were having and business problems and cash flow problems. And I went, I'm at home. I mean, this is the same thing I deal with every day. And I learned, David, that when you let the veil down, when you let the facade down, we're all dealing with issues in our life, right? We're just people, and we have things and we need people around us. We weren't designed to be in isolation because isolation is the enemy to excellence. And if we really want to take our life to the next level, we have to surround ourselves with non-biased, trusted advisors, people that can give us great feedback. And that's what I found in that group. We were called the Eagles, And I found that and discovered it. And when I retired, Dan Miller said, you need to coach. And I said, I'm not coaching. I've been working since I was 13 years old. I'm tired. I'm going to go down to St. John in the Caribbean, and I'm going to rock myself into an oblivion. And Dan Miller said, that's the most selfish thing I've ever heard you say. And I looked at him and I said, what? I've been working since I was 13. I'm 50. I'm ready to retire. He said, you need to coach. So Dave Ramsey spoke up and he said, come and do Entree Leadership Mastery. I'll give it to you. And I went, well, that's cool. That's a $10,000 gift. I'll do it. So David, I fell in love with it. I mean, I went for a week and it was incredible. Then Dan Miller invited me to the sanctuary. He said, do this coaching program I've got called Innovate. And so I went through that, and he texted me on the way home that night. I live here in Nashville, and so does Dave and Dan. We all live pretty close together. And he said, Averin, the people were leaning in, listening to your stories. And I said, well, maybe I'm just a good storyteller. He said, no, you've got something to say. He said, you and Robin have been married over 30 years. You've owned a dozen businesses. He said, you need to educate, train, and encourage these people to do the same. So as a Christian by faith, I said, I've got to pray about it. We pray about everything. And so my wife felt compelled to encourage me to do it. So I started coaching 2 guys, started doing podcast interviews, and voila, here we are 7 years later, 19 mastermind groups. And there's some life transformation happening, David, all over the world as a result of these mastermind groups. So that's the gist of a 40-year transition to get us to where we're at today.
Wow. Wow. That's a great story. Now, you had mentioned something pre-podcast about some auto accident. What's that story?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to that story. So when I was young, I was all about success. I wanted to make money because my dad wasn't a very good business person. He was a great man, but he just didn't know how to make money. And I wanted better. I wanted to make more money. And so we formed a partnership with a couple of guys and had a very successful company. And I told you earlier, I sold it to a Fortune 500. And then I took off for about 1.5 years, got fat and lazy. I gained 30 pounds, in about 6 months, and then about 50 pounds in about 18 months. And my wife said, you got to go back to work, man. You're getting fat and lazy. And I did. I bought the company I started with when I was 13 years old, and we grew it to about 4 times the size over the next 10 years. But my life changed forever, August the 1st, 2001. I was headed to the office. I'd been at our church. It was a Wednesday morning. We met with our pastor every Wednesday morning. 5 of us did, and we prayed for the church. And I've been in leadership in our church my whole adult life. And we prayed for our families. And we did that every Wednesday morning. We'd meet about 5 in the morning, and we would meet to about 6:30 or 7. And it was about 7:25 in the morning. I was about a mile from my office, and a guy named Enrique was crossing the street to catch a local bus. And he didn't look my way, and he ran out in front of me, and I ran over and killed a pedestrian that morning. And my life literally come to a screeching halt. And I don't know, David, if you've ever been in a very traumatic experience. It was like a slow motion movie playing out. I couldn't believe it. And I finally got my composure enough to turn around and look behind me, and there was this elderly gentleman face down in the street, and cars were stopping. It was a busy 4-lane highway. And I got out, and people were jumping out of their cars and running over to his aid. And I finally got the courage to walk up, and he was motionless, and the police got there and the ambulance got there, and they put him on a gurney. And I said, is he okay? And they said, he's alive. They said, but he's got severe head trauma. So they put me in the police car, and they started asking me questions, and people started coming to my defense and saying he ran out in front of me. It wasn't my fault, but nonetheless, it was a very difficult situation. They called me on Saturday morning at 9:30, and they said, Mr. Walker, Enrique didn't make it. And I said, you got to be kidding. And they said, no, sir, I'm sorry, but he didn't make it. Well, I can't describe to you in words, David, the way I felt that day. And even today, 19 years later, I can't describe to you. I can still feel that in the car. I can still see it very vividly. And something happened that day to me, though. I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about how fragile life is. It was so unexpected. In just a moment, my life changed. And so I consulted my attorney, and he said, whatever you do, don't call the family, don't contact them. And it's the first thing I did. So I looked up the family, and I called them, and I said, I've got to pay my condolences. I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am. And They were from Honduras. And so, excuse me, I can't think of the name of the city, but I just said, I can't even begin to tell you what I feel right now. And they said, Mr. Walker, we know it wasn't your fault. We've had witnesses attest to he ran out in front of you. He couldn't see well. He was 77 years old, and he just couldn't see well. And so I sold the business, couldn't handle the stress. I had a very successful company at the time. I was seeing counselors and talking to people. And what I discovered through that process, it took me 5 years. I saw counselors and had people advise me and help me and work me through that. And Robin and I traveled around the world, kind of got my feet back under me. We changed locations. I built a new house and had to keep busy to keep my mind off of that. And one day I gained 50 pounds again. Robin said, you're getting fat and lazy again. It's time to go back to work. And I did. But what I learned through that, David, was that I had had great success financially. No question about it. We had a number of retail outlets and we had had great success, but I had no significance. And what I mean by that is if that had been me that day that had gotten killed, what would my legacy have been? And I thought about it for a minute and I felt guilty. I said, my legacy would have been poor kid from Nashville, Tennessee, makes enough money to retire at age 27 and nobody cares. And I thought, that's not what I want my legacy to be. I want my legacy to be David's life is better as a result of having known me. I want to help take him to the next level. I want to edify him, encourage him, help him be successful like I've been successful. So we changed the paradigm shift of our life. We started focusing outward and being a giver rather than a taker, because we had the big house, the vacation home, the Mercedes. We had all the stuff, but nobody was interested in that. Nobody cared about what I had. And so I thought, how can I make it different? And so we've built our entire model different. We help people, we encourage them, we train them. I've had so many people go in competition against me, and I've helped them do it. I've helped them build businesses. And today we teach people to be the giver and not the taker. And when you live your life that way, you're a lot more successful, and you're certainly a lot more significant in the lives of your peers and colleagues.
That's an incredibly powerful story. And it's very interesting to hear it from the side of the person who hit the individual. Yeah. Not your fault, but sure. Hit the individual. Because normally what we hear in these stories is we hear someone who went through the tragedy, who was hit or was in a car accident themselves and was hurt. And we don't hear a lot of the perspective from people who are on the other side of the accident, whether they're at fault or, in your case, not at fault.
Sure. I thought about that too, and I think about it today. Even in our mastermind groups, we have a questionnaire, and there's 10 questions that we have to answer every week. And one of the questions is do you text and drive? And so the guys answer that question, or the ladies that are in the ladies groups answer that question, because if I had been doing something that day that had me distracted and I had run over and killed a pedestrian, I would have never gotten over it. I see people all the time. They're talking on phones, they're texting, they're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're checking their email, and they're driving. It only takes a millisecond for a child to ride a bicycle out in front of you in a neighborhood. And just think, having that on your conscience, that you were distracted by doing something, first of all, that's illegal. Second of all, that it could wait till you got home. And so I started thinking, I don't drink. And so I thought, well, if I'd been a person that does drink and I was impaired, or I think if I was texting or emailing and I ran over and killed somebody, forever that would be on my conscience. And I don't know that I could ever work through that. So if you're listening today, really think through what you're doing, because in a millisecond, you could be distracted and take someone's life. And so thankfully, I wasn't doing anything. Thankfully, he just ran out and I wasn't at fault. But if I had been, I don't think I could have gotten over it. It took me 5 years to work through it to begin with, much less if it had been my fault.
Yeah. And it strikes me, if I'm going to be candid, that I did a drive 2 hours, hour and a half to 2 hours each way this morning, and did not do anything. I mean, I chose a podcast while I was going down, but still that takes my mind off for a moment. When I did a text, I did it with voice with Siri, but and when I accepted a call, once again, it was a one click. But still, if I'm going to be candid, and I do a lot less and I'm much more controlled than I used to be. I was not a good example 3 years ago. But if I'm going to be totally candid, and I think everybody on the podcast needs to ask themselves a similar question. Even as I'm doing that, I don't have 100% concentration on the road anymore. Even though with that one touch by California law, I'm within the law and I only have one earpiece in instead of two, but I'm still not totally there. Now, am I totally there anyway? Cause I tend to daydream. Well, that's a whole another argument, but
right.
That's an important question when you put it in the context of driving is such a strange thing, because I mean, I know a guy who was with his family. They pulled out from a light and it's a 2-lane road, 55-mile-an-hour plus. And some guy came through in a Mini Cooper, 90 miles an hour, hit him right in the right place in their minivan and killed all four of them. You know, a half a second later or earlier, might have been a bad accident, but maybe they weren't dead. 2 seconds difference, you know, he wouldn't have been hit at all.
Right.
So driving's a really strange phenomenon. We had this fantasy that we're totally in control.
Yeah, we're not. I'm just going to tell you we're not, because anything could happen. You're driving a vehicle that weighs 6,000 to 8,000 pounds, 75 miles an hour. And then we're looking down at our phone and we're texting. And do you realize how far you go at 75 or 80 miles an hour in a 3-second span and what can happen? I just want to encourage the people. I don't want to beat you up, but I do want to encourage you to think about if it were one of your children that were riding their bicycle or chasing a ball into the street and some person driving wasn't in control and they were texting or drinking or looking away, you know, you would forever begrudge that. And then that person would forever have it on their conscience. But just simply think through it. But back to the mastermind, that's the reason that we surround ourselves with trusted advisors, because left to ourselves, we only have one perspective. And then you have multiple perspectives of people. Jim Rohn says we are the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. That's the reason that I want to be in mastermind groups with people that are very, very smart. They have different perspectives and different backgrounds and are very diverse. It gives us just this perspective on life and business that we wouldn't have otherwise. I've been in a mastermind group every week for 21 years now, and it has radically transformed the way I do business, the way I do life. It gives me a different spiritual context. It's just nice to have your own board of directors.
I don't want to cross any boundaries, but can you give some specific examples, you know, on how it has changed your life? Before I was doing this, now I do this. I mean, come on.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't mind being transparent. I'm very authentic and transparent, and I'll be. But, you know, I'm an ideas guy. I'm a creator developer, and I've been that way my entire life. You know, when it's mundane and it's managing something, I get bored. That's why I've owned 14 businesses. After I figure it out and get it up and going, I'll sell it and go do something else because I get bored with something. The other thing that I've found out about myself is that all the businesses I've owned up until this one has been about myself. This business is about others, and I've owned this business 7 years, longer than any business I've ever owned. I've owned this one, and it's because of the benefit, the transformation for other people, not necessarily myself. We're a lot more significant now than we were ever before, and we make twice as much money now. Isn't it funny how when you start looking outward, how that works that way? I think that's the way God intended it. But some of the things that I would do, give you an example. When I get out of the shower, I'd have 3 new ideas. You know, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to transform the world, not get into the mastermind group. And I would share the idea, and Dave Ramsey would look at me and he'd go, why don't you shut up? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard you say. And I was like, well, it was a good idea on the way out here. And this morning in the shower, I was thinking about it as a good idea. Or Dan Miller may say, wait a minute, hold on. Tell us again what you said. And I would say it. He'd say, you know, it wouldn't work that way. But if you would do this, and if you would take this resource, and if I could introduce you to this person, I think we could put that together and it would be something that you could really monetize, or you could really transform the lives of other people. See, I didn't have that component. See, I didn't have that resource, or I didn't have that insight that he gave me. And for me, masterminds, the perspective is invaluable. We don't know what we don't know. And when they start looking at it from a different perspective, we did a construction project at my house recently, and we stood out in front with the architect and the builder and the designer, the vendor and the subcontractor and the general contractor, and there was a problem they couldn't fix. There was a structural problem they couldn't fix. And we looked at that thing for an afternoon. Then the next day we couldn't. I said, man, we've got to figure this out. So about a week later, I was sitting on my back patio on a coaching call, and I looked up and I solved it immediately. And the reason I solved it immediately, I was looking at it from the wrong perspective earlier. And when I looked at it from a different perspective, I was able to make the connection. You see, that's what mastermind groups do for us. Masterminds give us that different perspective. They have Jeff Hoffman, the guy that started Priceline. I spoke to him at a conference, and he was telling about reading and how important reading was to him. But he said the most important part of reading to him was that 10% of everything he read daily had nothing to do with anything he was interested in. And I'm like, why is that so? Because it opens up a new horizon. And he said 90% of the deals that I've made that has been very profitable have come out of that 10% reading. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Because when we learn something, it opens up a new avenue. And that's what masterminds do for us. It gives us the ability to see it from a different angle, from a different perspective. I could go on for hours and tell you specific incidents that happened in there, such as marriage. I was the youngest guy in that group, only by a few months. Dave Ramsey and I are within a couple of months of each other, but technically, out of 10 men, I was the youngest one in there. The other guys had been married longer and had children and grandchildren that were older than mine. And I would say, I'm going to go home and tell Robin this or tell her that. And Ron Doyle would say, he's been married 15 years longer than me, that's not going to serve you well. And here's why. And I'm like, man, I never thought about that. See, he'd already lived that journey. He had already experienced that in this place in his life. Kids, when they start college, I'm like, I'll tell you what they're going to do. This is how they're going to do. And then the other guys would go, Tommy would go, no, I've had 3 children in college, and here's what's going to happen. And I was like, man, see, they experienced it. They knew what was going to happen. And that's the reason that masterminds, listen, in my office, every idea I've got is a great idea, every one of them. But when I take it to those non-biased trusted advisors, they don't have anything to gain or lose as a result of telling me the truth because they don't have a dog in the hunt. Now I'm going to get factual data. I'm going to get information. I'm going to get wisdom. I'm going to get experience. And that's why we've had some successful companies, because I subject myself to the scrutiny of other people and allow them to speak honestly in my life.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful. Now, on the screen behind you, you've got Iron Sharpens Iron. I want you to talk about iron sharpens iron, but I also want you to answer kind of a difficult question. It's like mastermind sounds great, assuming the rest of the guys in the group. Are they all, you have men's group and women's group, or do you interpopulate between gender?
No, that you can, I've been in groups where there were both. Our groups, we have men, we have 15 groups with just men. We have 3 groups with just women. We have 1 group with emerging men, young guys. And I'll tell you why. Iron sharpens iron. Proverbs 27:17 is one man sharpens another as iron sharpens iron. There's got to be some sparks flying, right, in order for us to get down to what the real crux to the problem is. In our mastermind groups, nothing is off limits. We totally subject ourselves to the scrutiny of the other people. We totally say nothing is off limits. And so we tackle very tough issues. We talk about your integrity and your character, and we talk about things that really plague men like pornography, your identity tied up in the wrong thing. We talk about the boundaries that you set or don't set. We talk about every issue of your life, being the husband God called you to be or the father that he called you to be. The reason is because I came home with a pocket full of money to a house full of strangers when my kids were little, because I'd spent all of my time making money, building a bigger empire, more stores. And then I realized that someone else was watching one of my daughters at a piano recital instead of me. Or maybe somebody is watching your son play baseball instead of you because you're at the office and little Billy wants to pitch ball, but you haven't got the time because you got to send another email. Listen, we only get one go through with those children. I can make more money. I can start more companies. My company doesn't have a memory. My children do. And I don't want to have those regrets. I want to be able to say, hey, I gave it all I had. I was available. I was there for you. There's seasons in our life that we can't help, that we've got to do certain things that we don't really want to do. But when it's a precedent, when you set out in your life that you're working 12 or 14 hours a day and your family's at home and somebody else is doing those things with them, there's going to be a day you're going to regret that because you're going to die a rich old man with no relationships. And I really encourage people to really think through that. And I don't want people to go down that path. And that's why today we call you out. We have an accountability chart. That's why we really dive deep into your personal life to see what's motivating you so that you don't have those regrets.
So I agree with all that. I totally agree with that. I think there's huge value there. But let me go back to this. How do you, as an organizer of the mastermind groups, make certain that you've got people of similar caliber or whatever in that group? Because I mean, if you take somebody like maybe not you and me that got, 40 years experience, whatever. But even at 30 years experience, those kids are gone. Now you still have relationships, there's still a personal side. There's a spiritual side, but how does somebody be confident that they're going to join a group where, the old thing, a cord of three strands is not easily broken. Okay. And I forget who I heard talk on it. He was a great speaker. I wish I could remember. It was years ago, Promise Keepers Conference, but he talked about get into a relationship.
James Rowell with Promise Keepers.
Yeah, maybe. But he talked about, you're going to get somebody who's older and wiser than you, who's putting into you. Yeah. And then you're going to get somebody who's younger that you're putting into. But how do you get in a mastermind group? It sounds like, although you're going to have a little bit of that, there's going to be kind of a similar drive.
I can tell you. First of all, James Riles, who you're referring to, he was in our group. He was in the Eagles group. And he traveled all over the world speaking for Promise Keepers, and best storyteller I've ever heard in my life. He passed away, by the way, about 3 years ago, just so you know. So the way that we do is we take applications, and they do interviews with me. And so it's a very extensive application that we go through. And we tell people when they join this criteria, we tell them that you've got to be authentic and transparent and vulnerable. And if that's not you, you don't need to join our group. So that's the way we do it. Other people want to set up their own groups, and we developed a plan for that. It's called the Mastermind Playbook. And we've developed a framework to walk you through 34 videos. There's 100 tools and templates that we work you through to help you get to the place to where you are aligning with somebody with the same core values, somebody's mission statement that is similar in nature, not exact, their mission, their purpose. We align those things, and we say, you probably wouldn't be a good fit for us because of these things. You don't align with these core values. You are not willing to subject yourself to the scrutiny of others. You don't want to be authentic. If you're starting your own group, it takes time. And it takes a lot of time to get to know somebody. And I tell people, when you get into a mastermind group, you don't throw all your dirty laundry out at one time. You don't become very authentic and transparent immediately. People have to earn that. And you dole out a little bit, and you see if they can be trusted, and you see the type of feedback that they give you and the information and the wisdom. And slowly you let the rope out. Slowly you give people everything. And then when you're in a group like I was in for 10 or 12 years with the Eagles, you know without a shadow of a doubt the integrity that these people bring to the table because you spent so much time. The people that really get into trouble are people jumping around in masterminds, and they suck them for all they're worth, and they get the connections and the networking out, and they go to the next group. That's not what we do. The average mastermind group historically meets for about a year. Our people average 3.2 years. We've had people meeting 5, 6, 7 years in our groups because we really let them know what they're getting involved in early on. So it's a very deliberate interview. It's a very deliberate action that we're pursuing to make sure that your values align. Because if you get into a mastermind group and your core values don't align, you need to get out of that group, because there's no way to come to a general consensus. The scripture tells us that there's value in the general consensus of the multitude. And that's where the wisdom is found. But if your core values don't align, you need to get out of that group, because
Yeah,
they're
but
never going to be able to give you that.
you're telling me, Aaron, that you're checking that at the front end. So that shouldn't be an issue unless somebody's a poser
And
or doesn't really
sometimes,
understand their
right,
values.
we do. We vet people at the beginning through this application process, to an interview process. But even then, David, to be totally honest, some people slip through. And once we discover that, we ask them to leave. And I just recently asked someone to leave. And so you don't stay just because you can pay the money. One bad apple. I interviewed Cody Foster not long ago. He owns Advisors XL out in Topeka, Kansas. He and two partners started that business about 23 years ago. This year they did $8 billion in revenue. And I asked him, I said, Cody, if you had to go over, what is the number one thing you would do faster? He said, I would get rid of problem employees. He said, we have 400 employees today. He said, one bad apple does spoil the whole bunch. And he said, you need to hire very slow and you need to fire fast. And he said, you need to take your time and vet the people and make sure they're the right fit. No different than any organization, no different than mastermind groups. You just really need to do your due diligence.
Yeah, that hiring piece is a whole nother conversation that I love, because I got a great hiring system. But I think you're absolutely right. I run into that all the time with my clients. I've got one now. I said, you got to fire that person. Well, I'm working on it. No, you got to do that. I mean, you have two people that won't talk with the person, don't want anything to do with them, but you're trying to shield from them as you're trying to work out this other solution, waiting to hire someone, whatever the
They're
reason
just
is.
delaying the inevitable is all they're doing.
Well, and they're hurting the individual
They are,
as well
sure,
as their team. The
sure,
individual needs to have an opportunity to move on, and by holding on to them, they may miss out on a better opportunity because they're still at your place. So,
and he's still got a lot of repair work to do with the team once that person's gone. And so there'll be credibility have to be earned again, and respect, and get rid of the bad apple quickly.
Yeah. So we need to wrap up, I think, pretty close, but this has been really good. I mean, I'm being candid with you that, I have not run peer groups or mastermind groups, but been doing leadership consulting since 2006, been studying leadership intensely since 2003, been an entrepreneur since, similar to yourself, like since I was 16. So a long time, and I'm 63. But I was very interested in the conversation because I thought that you had some different things to say about how a mastermind group can be done and the impact it can have. And you haven't disappointed. So are there any closing comments that you want to give to our audience? And also, how can they learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll just end with this. There's a couple of things that I'll say. First of all, the reason that mastermind groups are so effective, two reasons. First of all, the benefit of the trusted advisors. The second thing is coaching, and I do coaching as well. Coaching is a high-paying job. Coaching is not a business. Mastermind groups can be a business, because I just got back from a 2-week vacation. 19 groups kept on. I had more money when I got back. I didn't have to cancel any appointments. There's money in perpetuity coming in. I have facilitators that are leading the groups that I don't even have to participate in. Now I've got an asset that I can sell when I get ready to retire for the 4th time. And so masterminds is a great way to add a lot of income. It only takes 2 groups for a 6-figure income. So a lot of the people out there that are coaches, podcast hosts, that are looking for a way to really monetize these peer groups, the mastermindplaybook.com is a source, that something that you could really make an investment in to really get a great return. And I'll just leave with the same thing I normally say on podcast interviews: fear missing an opportunity more than you fear failure, and develop a can-do attitude, and you too can be very successful and significant as you go about this journey we're calling life.
Awesome. And what's the best way to learn more about you? What's the website, domain, or anything like that?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. And thank you for having me on Manage to Win. Viewfromthetop.com is the best way to reach out to me. My phone number's there, email. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. And if you're interested, reach out, viewfromthetop.com.
Awesome. Aaron, thanks so much for the insights today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, David. I did as well.